This is Dr. Salim Rahman, and our today's lecture is on project risk management. In today's lecture, we will study what risk is, what are the components of risk, what is meant by risk tolerance, what are the methodologies for risk management, how do we identify, quantify, and decide about the response, and how to control risk. We'll also talk about how do we take decisions. We will look at different classifications of the decisions, the process involved in decision making, and finally some criteria. Risk can be defined to be a measure of the probability and consequence of not achieving a defined project goal. Certain questions that we may ask ourselves include: can the product be produced within budgeted cost? Can the product launch date be met? It is not easy to measure probability and the consequence of failure, as these are not measurable parameters. So a qualitative assessment is required most of the times. The common sources of risks include poorly defined requirements, lack of qualified resources, lack of management support, poor estimation, and inexperienced project managers. Here are the components of risk. The lack of knowledge of future events. Now, future events can be favorable or unfavorable. If those are favorable, we call them opportunities. If those are unfavorable, we call them risks. Now, risk has three primary components. An event, that means an unwanted or unplanned change, a probability of occurrence of that event, and the impact of that event. So conceptually, risk is a function of uncertainty and the damage it can cause. If we look at the usual risk tolerance, with increasing probability, we will be willing to accept a risk if the impact of the damage is small. So in this region, if we fall in this region below this curve, we would like to accept risk. But if the probability of the occurrence of an event as well as the impact of that occurrence are high, then we would like to avoid risk. The project management body of knowledge by the Project Management Institute states project risk management as one of the key knowledge areas, and there are 6 processes covered under this knowledge area. The first one, which is the risk management planning, it refers to deciding how to approach and plan the risk management activities for a project. Someone very aptly said that a ship in harbor is safe, but that is not ships are built for. So if you are in a business, if you are pursuing a project, you have to go out in the sun, you have to face risks. The first process, which is the risk management planning, it has its inputs as project charter, risk management policies, defined roles and responsibilities, stakeholders risk tolerance, risk management plan template, and the work breakdown structure. And the technique that we apply is planning meetings, and the output is the risk management plan. Risk identification is the second process. It helps determine which risks are likely to affect the project and documenting the characteristics of each risk. and this should be performed on a regular basis. Now we can classify risks as external or internal risks. This process has its inputs as risk management plan, which was the output of the previous process, the project planning outputs, the risk categories, and historical information. The tools and techniques that we employ in this process include documentation reviews, information gathering techniques, checklists, assumptions analysis, and diagramming techniques. And the outputs include risks, triggers, and inputs to other processes. Then there are two more processes which are interlinked, and those are qualitative and quantitative risk analyses. The qualitative risk analysis refers to performing a qualitative analysis of risks and conditions to prioritize their effects for project objectives. The quantitative risk analysis refers to measuring the probability and consequences of risks and estimating their implications for project objectives. This process has its inputs as risk management plan, identified risks, project status, project type, data precision, scales of probability and impact, and assumptions. The tools and techniques include risk probability and impact, rating matrix, assumptions testing, and data precision ranking. And the outputs include overall risk ranking, risk prioritized, list of risks for additional analysis and management, and trends in qualitative risk analysis. Coming to the quantitative risk analysis process, the inputs include risk management plan, identified risks, list of prioritized risks, list of risks for additional analysis, historical information, expert judgment, and other planning outputs. The techniques include interview, sensitivity analysis, decision tree analysis, and simulation. And the outputs are prioritized list of quantified risks, probabilistic project analysis, probability of meeting cost and time objectives, and trends in quantitative risk analysis. The next process is risk response planning. It refers to developing procedures and techniques to enhance opportunities and reduce threats to the project objectives. The inputs to this process include risk management plan, lists of prioritized risks, risk ranking, prioritized list of quantified risks, probabilistic project analysis, probability of meeting cost and time objectives, list of potential responses, risk thresholds, risk owners, common causes, and trends in quantitative and qualitative risk analyses. The techniques used in this process are avoidance, transference, mitigation, and acceptance of risks. And the outputs are risk response plan, residual risks, secondary risks, contractual agreements, contingency reserves needed, input to other processes, and inputs to revised project plan. Risk management is an organized means of identifying and measuring risk and developing, selecting, and managing options for handling these risks. It is both art and science of identifying, analyzing, and responding to risk factors throughout the life of project and in best interest of its objectives. So it is basically a proactive rather than a reactive approach. The risk response development, as we saw in the tools and techniques of this process, are avoidance, mitigation, transference, and acceptance. And we will now see these one by one. Risk avoidance. The best thing one can do with a risk is to avoid it. If one can prevent it from happening, it definitely won't hurt the project. The easiest way to avoid the risk is to walk away from the cliff, but that may not be a plausible option in many situations. Risk mitigation. If we can't avoid a risk, we can mitigate it. This means taking some sort of action that will cause it to do as little damage to the project as possible. Risk mitigation refers to the strategy of preparing for and lessening the effects of threats. It is also known as risk reduction. So after identification, you can take certain steps to minimize the effects of the threat that you are facing. Risk transference. One effective way to deal with a risk is to have someone else to accept it for us. The most common way to do this is to buy insurance. Risk transference refers to the shifting of the burden of loss due to risk to another party. It can be through legislation, contract, insurance, or other means. Risk acceptance. When we can't avoid, mitigate, or transfer a risk, then we have no choice but to accept it. But even when we accept a risk, at least we would have looked at all possible alternatives and known in advance what will happen if it occurs. This is where we can think of making up the loss through some other means. The last process under this key knowledge area is risk monitoring and control. It involves executing the risk management plan in order to respond to risk events over the course of the project. When changes occur, the basic cycle of identify, quantify, and respond is repeated. The risk monitoring and control process has inputs as risk management plan, risk response plan, project communications, additional risk identification analysis, and scope changes. The tools and techniques include project risk response audits, periodic project risk reviews, earned value analysis, technical performance measurement, and additional risk response planning. And the outputs are workaround plans, corrective actions, change requests, updates to risk response plan, risk database, updates to risk identification checklist. We saw the risk tolerance in general terms. However, the tolerance of the project managers or the sponsors of a project can vary with the amount at stake. The project managers rely on sound judgment and appropriate tools to deal with risks. Ultimate decision is based on the project manager's tolerance for risk. There are some people who are risk averters. They would like to see how much is at stake and what is the utility. And if the amount which is at stake increases, then their chances of taking risk decline. There are people who are risk neutral. No matter how much amount it is at stake, they find its utility to be same, and they would take a decision of taking risk or not taking risk regardless of the amount at stake. And there are people who are risk seekers. The more there is at stake, the higher the chances that they will take that risk. That brings us to the second topic of this lecture, which is decision making. Decision making can be defined as the act of evaluating alternatives for meeting an objective and selecting that course of action or alternative which is most likely to result in attaining the defined objective. The decisions can be taken at individual or personal level, at the level of a group, of an organization, or global. Whenever we confront a decision situation, we have to consider what the decision itself is, who the decision maker is, what is the decision making process, and in which environment the decision is being made. Taking these one by one, looking at the profile of decisions can either be basic or routine. The basic decisions include long-term commitments. These involve large expenditures and they have higher degree of importance. The routine decisions are repetitive in nature and these have minor impact on organizations or projects. The decision maker, his or her personality traits, grooming, manner of handling issues, and intellect play a distinctive role in the decision making process. There are certain steps that we need to take before the decision has been taken. The pre-decision making processes include identification, which provides a basis for rest of the analysis. This is where problem needs to be stated in explicit terms and usually people consider it trivial and this is a mistake that they commit. Then the second process or phase is development of a decision. It defines the boundaries and constraints and searches for alternatives using past experience, resourcefulness and creativity. And then selection. For selection we have to apply a decision criteria and then by applying that decision criteria we choose the most promising alternative. Coming to the post-decision making steps, implementation is the first one. A decision is successful if it remains viable after implementation, if it manifests an acceptable degree of congruency between actual and expected outcomes, and elicits enthusiasm and skill from those carrying it out. And finally, the follow-up and control. The results of a decision need to be compared with expectations continuously so as to reorder the operations, redirect the personnel, reset the objectives, or revise the entire decision. Decision making and risk management are interrelated. Risk management involves decision making under certainty or under risk or under the conditions of uncertainty. From certainty to risk to uncertainty, the potential damage to project increases. We have to understand that it is important to take the right decision at the right time. The requirements for decision making include objectives, alternatives, criterion, evaluation, and selection. The characteristics of objectives include that the objectives can either be formal or informal. These cover expectations and intentions of the managers, and these are mostly quantifiable so that a measure of performance is established, a target level is set, and a time limit is established. Coming to the assessment of alternatives, the alternatives can be assessed on 4 grounds. Effectiveness is one of those. This is where we have to answer the question, does it provide the best level of achievement of the goal with minimum disruption? If we want to look at the efficiency of a decision, the question that we need to ask is, can it be accomplished with least use of resources? Looking at the equity side, the question that we need to answer is, will the cost and benefits be apportioned fairly? And finally, when we look at the efficacy of a decision, we would like to answer the question, will the intended objective be achieved with acceptable ethical consequences? The tools that we have at hand for decision making include entity interaction charts, flow charts, mathematical modeling, decision trees, heuristics, CPM and PERT. CPM PERT stand for Critical Path Method, and program evaluation and review techniques, and finally simulations. Decision trees are used when at different stages we have to make decision or we have to choose an alternative, and reaching the next stage again we have some choices, and the way we proceed is that you will look at the chances of success or chances of occurrence of an event. Suppose the chances of occurrence of this event are 60% and 40% in this case, and if we have reached this stage we have three options or three routes, and these have probabilities of 0.3, 0.3 and 0.4. If we reach this stage we have two alternatives each with a 50% chance, and if we reach this stage we have 60% chances of this event occurring and 40% chances of occurrence of this event, and so on. So what we do is we multiply the probabilities. For example, 0.6 into 0.3 into 0.5 is 0.09. Likewise on this path also 0.6 into 0.3 into 0.5 is 0.09. Notice that when we had these two options, the sum of these two chances or probabilities is 1. Likewise in this case this 0.3 plus 0.3 plus 0.4, again the overall chances are 1. Likewise the chances of these two events add up to 1, and same is the case here in all the options, and eventually if we add up all these probabilities they again add up to 1. Heuristics are efficient mental processes or shortcuts that help solve problems without going into the mathematical jugglery. These may not be proven to yield optimum results. These use common sense or rules of thumb, but these are not the only ways to come up with plausible solutions. Heuristics can be classified into 12 categories. The first one being consistency. In this approach, one responds to a situation in a way that allows him or her to remain consistent. Then we have educated guess. This is when we reach a conclusion without exhaustive research. With an educated guess, we consider what we had observed in the past and apply that history to a situation where a more definite answer has not yet been found. Absurdity is an approach that is very atypical and unlikely. In other words, a situation that is absurd. This heuristic is applied when a claim or belief seems silly or seems to defy common sense. Common sense is a practical and prudent approach that is applied to a decision where the right and wrong answers seem relatively clear-cut. Contagion is an approach in which the decision maker avoids something that is thought to be bad or contaminated. For example, in the aftermath of bird flu, one would avoid consumption of eggs and chicken. Availability is a heuristic where the decision maker judges a situation on the basis of the examples of similar situations that come to one's mind, allowing the decision maker to extrapolate to a situation in which he or she finds himself or herself. The rule of thumb is a broad approach to problem solving. It's a simple heuristic that allows an individual to make an approximation without having to do exhaustive research. Working backwards, it allows the decision maker to solve a problem by assuming that they have already solved it and working backward in their minds to see how such a solution might have been reached. Familiarity allows a user to approach an issue or problem based on the fact that the situation is one with which he or she is familiar, and so one should act the same way he or she acted in the same situation before. Scarcity. This approach is used when a particular object becomes rare or scarce. This approach suggests that if something is scarce, then it is more desirable to obtain it. affect when a person makes a snapped judgment based on a quick impression. This heuristic views the situation quickly and decides without further research whether a thing is good or bad. Naturally, this heuristic can be both helpful and harmful when applied in a wrong situation. And finally, the authority. When a decision maker believes the opinion of a person of authority on a subject just because the individual is an authority figure. People apply this heuristic all the time in matters such as science, politics, and education. Decision analysis is a systematic approach of decision making that allows managers to solve problems with uncertainty figures as a prominent factor. A normative model is developed to represent the decision making problem, facilitate logical analysis, and recommend a course of action. The technique is most useful in managerial situations where risk is significant. In the normative approach, we have the organizations or the project's goals and objectives. We have certain performance criteria. We identify problem, look for various alternatives. We apply the selection criteria and make a choice. Test our choice, implement and control, and we pass it through our feedback loop in which we apply the performance criteria, and we may repeat this process if needed. Coming to the decisions under the conditions of certainty, this is where states of nature and expected payoffs are known with 100% accuracy, and in such situations we can have only one dominant strategy. The payoff matrices are generally used to identify states of nature over which we do not have control, and we select actions to be taken for each state of nature called strategies. Here is an example of a payoff matrix. These are the three strategies or three options or alternatives, and the states of nature or nature state 1, which is high, 2 moderate, and 3 low. And we know it for sure that if we confront this situation, strategy S1 can yield a payoff of $50 million, strategy 2 $60 million, and strategy 3 $100 million. If we confront this situation, then strategy 1 would yield $45 million, strategy 2 $55 million, and strategy 3 $75 million. And under the third state of nature, minus $30 million under strategy 1, $65 million for strategy 2, and $85 million for strategy 3. And we notice whether we confront this situation or this, no matter which situation or which state of nature we confront, strategy 3 yields the best result. We note that whether the nature state 1 or state 2 or state 3, we get the maximum payoff for strategy 3. So this is the only dominant strategy, and so we choose S3, because regardless of how the market reacts, S3 will always yield larger profits than the other two. However, in practical life, we will seldom come across such situations. We may be confronted with a situation where we have to take decisions under risk. So practically one dominant strategy for all states of nature would not exist. Higher profits are accompanied by higher risks and therefore higher probable losses also, and probability must be assigned to the occurrence of each state of nature. Here is another example. Now, in the case of decision making under risk, we have to associate certain probabilities to each state of nature. So in this particular case, we have assigned 30% chances to state 1, 45% chances to state 2, and 25% to state 3. Now what we do is we find the expected value or average, and that we compute by multiplying the probability with each payoff. For example, for row 1 or for alternative or strategy 1, if we multiply 0.3 with 50, add 0.45 into 95 plus 0.25 into 30, so the expected value of strategy 1 will be 0.3 into 50 plus 0.45 into 95 plus 0.25 into 30, and that comes out to be 65.25. Similarly, if we multiply this 0.3 with 60, 0.45 with 55 and 0.25 with 65, we get the expected value as 59, and for S3 the expected value is 80.5. When we compare these three, we notice that 80.5 being the largest of these expected values, S3 should be our choice. There are situations where we have to make decisions under uncertainty. When uncertainty exists, meaningful assignments of probabilities are not existent. There cannot be any dominant strategy like the case of certainty. And here people use one of these 5 criteria. The first one is called the optimist criterion, or it is also called maximax. Then there is Wald or pessimist criteria, which is called maximin. Then there is Hurwitz criteria. People call it optimism pessimism criteria because it finds a way in between these two. Then there is Laplace criterion, and finally Savage or maximum regret criterion. This is also called minimax criteria. Let's have a look at these one by one. So coming to the first one, which is called the optimist criterion. Here the decision maker is optimistic. He is attracted by high payoffs and attempts to maximize profit. His strategy is based on go for broke. Adventurous people, gamblers and large corporations with strong assets use this criterion. And this is how it is performed. For each action alternative, that means the matrix row, determine the maximum payoff possible. From these maxima, select the maximum payoff. The alternative leading to this payoff is the chosen decision. We have the same payoff matrix that we used previously, except that now we do not have probabilities here. So the approach here is that for row 1, which is the strategy 1, select the maximum out of these 3, no matter which state of nature we are in. So out of 50, 95 and 30, we get 95 as the maximum. For strategy 2, out of 60, 55 and 65, 65 is the largest. For strategy 3, out of 85, 75 and 85, we have 2 large values. So we have marked the largest for each strategy. That means in each row we have at least one marked value. Now out of these marked values or bold-faced values, we have to pick the largest, and out of these the largest is this 95, and so S1 becomes our choice. So the optimist would like to think that everything would go perfectly, and so he should go for maximum profit. Compared to this, the Wald's criteria or the maximin criteria is just the opposite. Here the decision maker is concerned with how much he can afford to lose. He is basically a pessimist, and he thinks that everything that can possibly go wrong would go wrong, and he would like to choose the best out of the worst scenarios. In other words, minimizing the maximum loss or choosing the best of the worst scenarios. Cautious individuals and small companies would go for this criterion. The steps involved here are: for each action alternative, that means the matrix row, determine the minimum payoff possible. From these minima, select the maximum payoff. The alternative leading to this payoff is the chosen decision. Once again, we have the same payoff matrix, but previously we marked the largest in each row. This time we are going to mark the smallest. So in this first row or strategy 1, 30 is the smallest value. For strategy 2, 55 is the smallest value, and for strategy 3, 75 is the smallest value. Once we have marked these, we think chances are thing will go wrong, and in this situation we are likely to have to earn this. In this situation we are likely to earn this, and in strategy 3, under strategy 3, we are likely to earn this, and we would like to earn the maximum possible under the worst conditions, and so our choice would be this 75. In other words, we would choose strategy 3. So under the Maximax strategy or Maximax criterion, we tended to choose S1, and under Wald's criteria we tend to choose S3. An economist by the name of Hurwitz proposed a criterion which was a mix or combination of the optimistic and the pessimistic approaches. His proposal was that instead of going for extreme conditions, we need to find a middle of the road solution. According to his criteria, the optimistic values for each row are multiplied with the coefficient of optimism called alpha, and the pessimistic values, the minimum values in each row, are multiplied with 1 minus alpha, and then those products are summed up to get the expected value or average. The decision rule is as follows. Select a coefficient of optimism alpha. For every action alternative, compute its Hurwitz weighted average H. Choose the action alternative with the best, that means the maximum H value, as the chosen decision. We illustrate its application on the same payoff matrix that we have used earlier. We notice that for strategy 1, the minimum or the pessimistic value is 30. For strategy 2, it is 55, and for strategy 3, it is 75. For strategy 1, the optimistic value is 95. For strategy 2, it is 65, and for strategy 3, it is 85. Now, in order to compute the average value under this criteria, we need the value of alpha, the optimism coefficient. For that, let us choose alpha is equal to 0.25, giving 1 minus alpha as 0.75. Now we multiply this alpha of 0.25 with the maximum value of the row and 1 minus alpha or 0.75 with the minimum value of each row, and so for the strategy 1, the H value comes out to be 46.25. The H value for S2 is 57.5, and the H value for S3 comes out to be 77.50. This 77.50 being the maximum value, we choose S3 as the best choice under this criterion. Since we use only one alpha value, let us see the effect of alpha value on the decision that we make. Since alpha can vary between 0 and 1, if we choose alpha is equal to 1, this will lead us to the optimist approach. If we choose alpha is equal to 0, that would lead us to pessimist approach. Since we want to maximize the weighted average, here our solution would correspond to this line or this line, whichever is on top, and since there is an intersection at this point, the alpha value of 0.818 is the one at which these two lines intersect. So for alpha less than 0.818, S3 would be our choice. For alpha greater than 0.818, S1 would be our choice. S2 does not figure out anywhere because it remains below either this line or this line. Laplace proposed a very simple criterion. The Laplace insufficient reason criterion postulates that if no information is available about the probabilities of the various outcomes, it is reasonable to assume that those are equally likely. So if there are n outcomes, the probability of each should be 1 over n. This approach also suggests that the decision maker calculates the expected payoff for each alternative and select the alternative with the largest value. The use of expected values distinguishes this approach from the criteria of using only extreme payoffs. So it is similar to decision making under risk, except that here the probabilities are equally distributed. Applying this approach on the same payoff matrix with equal probabilities for each state of nature, we need to find out the expected values, and as we learned previously, the expected values can be found using the product of the probability with the numerical value here against each strategy. So if you want to find the expected value for strategy 1, for instance, we will multiply this 0.33 into 50 plus 0.33 into 95 plus 0.33 into 30, and we will get 58.33. Similarly, for strategy 2, the expected value would come out to be 60, and for strategy 3, the expected value is 81.67. This value being the largest, we would select S3. The Savage's minimax regret criterion. This criterion examines the regret or opportunity cost or loss resulting when a particular situation occurs and the payoff of the selected alternative is smaller than the payoff that could have been attained under that particular situation. It focuses on avoiding the worst possible consequences that could result when making a decision. Cautious decision makers who want to ensure that the selected alternative does well when compared to other alternatives regardless of the situation arising. It is especially useful in competitive environment. The steps involved in this approach are that from the payoff matrix, we take one option, meaning one row at a time, and we subtract the entry in that row from the maximum of the corresponding state of nature, that means column. So we subtract each value against a row from the maximum of the corresponding column. This step is repeated till we get a complete table of lost opportunities. Then for each row of this newly generated table, we mark the largest values or opportunity lost. Finally, we select the option with the minimum out of the marked lost opportunities. Let us illustrate this approach on the same payoff matrix. In this payoff matrix, where we have three strategies or three alternatives and three states of nature, we note that in this column the maximum is 85, and in order to generate the lost opportunity matrix for this position here, we will subtract this 50 from the maximum of this column, which is 85. So we get 85 minus 50 as 35. Then 85 minus this 60 is 25, and 85 minus 85, here we will get 0. When you go to the second column, against S1 or strategy 1, the maximum being 95, we get 95 minus 95 as 0, and then 95 being maximum, we subtract this 55 from that and we get 40. Then 95 minus 75, we get 20. Finally, in the last column, against S1, we get 85 minus 30 as 55, 80 minus 65 as 20, and 85 minus 85 as 0. We have computed the lost opportunities for all these strategies. Let us now choose the largest of these. So, finding the maximum lost opportunity for strategy S1, we select the maximum out of 35, 0 and 55. So we get 55 here. In the second row, the maximum out of 25, 40 and 20 is 40. And in the last row, the maximum out of 0, 20 and 0 is 20. Now when we have found the maximum opportunity loss for each strategy or alternative, we choose the minimum out of these, which is 20, and hence our selected option or strategy should be S3. Let us now compare the results that we obtained applying different criteria on the same payoff matrix. For the Maximax or the optimist criteria, our choice was S1. For the pessimist approach, our choice was S3. Under the Hurwitz approach, our choice was S1 for alpha greater than or equal to 0.818 and S3 for alpha less than 0.818. Under Laplace, we got S3 as our best choice, and under the Minimax criteria, again we get S3 as the best choice. So, applying different criteria on the same payoff matrix can lead to different strategies or different decisions, because in some cases we might be interested in maximizing our returns, in others we might be interested in minimizing our losses, or maybe having a combination of these two.